you are performing Skunk Ladder, and I don't have the oh, Patrick McManus. Are you ready? You may begin.
All right. Driving out to the country the other day, my wife and I passed the aromatic remains of at least 10 road-killed skunks. Must be a good year for skunks. Looks like a bad one for them, if you ask me. I mean, there's obviously a large skunk population this year. Just then, a live skunk scurried out in front of the car. I swerved to the left, and back to the right, and we managed to screech safely around it. My wife screeches quite often, but it was the first time I had screeched in years. Goodness, that was close. What would you have done if you had hit the skunk with the car? The only decent thing. I'd have stopped and buried it in the ditch. Might have even buried the skunk along with it. You talk as if you'd have a lot of experience with skunks. You bet. Mostly when I was a kid. You mean I've never told you about the skunk ladder? Boy, do you have a treat in store for you. Sorry I mentioned it, she mumbled, possibly in an attempt to conceal her intense interest in the bizarre tale. The Skunk Ladder by Patrick F. McManus. As I told her, my friend Crazy Eddie Muldoon and I were sitting on the Muldoon corral fence one summer afternoon, trying to think of something to do. This was shortly after I had nearly drowned in the creek while testing Eddie's deep-sea diving apparatus, after we had crashed our homemade plane during takeoff from the roof of the Muldoon barn, and after our submarine had failed to surface with us in the pond. But before Mr. Muldoon started being treated for a mysterious nervous condition. I recall his father seemed to be awfully jumpy that year. Eddie wondered if it might not be caused by eating vegetables. Even as we sat on the fence, Mr. Muldoon came by on his tractor and stopped to study us suspiciously. What are you two up to now? Nothing, Pa. Just trying to think of something to do. Well, when you figure something out, you let me know before you start to do it. Do you hear? Sure, Pa. I guess what we'll go do is go dig in the dirt. We've been talking about doing that. All right. Just don't build nothing. Digging the hole occupied us for most of a week. One of the problems with digging a hole is that it is difficult to know when a hole is big enough and deep enough. There are basically two types of holes dug in the ground. One, applied holes, such as for wells, posts, mines, etc. And two, holes for holes' sake. Eddie and I were digging one of the latter. Eventually, the hole was so deep we could barely heave shovelfuls of dirt over its sides. At that point, Eddie judged it to be finished. We were immensely proud of the hole, and I still don't believe I've seen a nicer one. It was so nice, in fact, that Eddie abandoned his view of it as purely an aesthetically pleasing hole and began trying to think of it as practical. You know what we could do with this hole? We could put branches over it, and then a wild animal would come along and fall into it. Then we could tame them and teach them to do tricks. We could start our own circus. We could charge people to see our animals do tricks. We might even get rich. I bet we could catch a deer or a bear or one of your father's cows. Yeah, I never thought of that. Tomorrow we better fill the hole back in. How about tonight? Maybe a cow will fall in tonight. I got it! there's a big old door out behind the barn. We'll bring it down here and put it over the hole. And that's what we did before knocking off work for the day, secure in the knowledge that the door would save us from the uncomfortable experience of watching his father undergo one of his fits of hysteria. Early the next morning, Eddie and I headed for the big hole, prepared to start the tedious task of undigging it. As we approached the excavation, a familiar odor reached our nostrils. Must be a skunk around here someplace. Maybe it's in the hole. It couldn't be. We covered it with the door. Nevertheless, the skunk was in the hole. He had apparently found an open space under the door, slipped in for a look, and plummeted the 8 feet or more to the bottom of the hole. Oddly, he did not seem to be scared of us. Even stranger, for we did not know that skunks were great diggers, he had hollowed out a huge cavern under one side of the hole in an attempt to dig his way out of the hole. We can't fill in the hole with a skunk in there. How are we going to get him out? Maybe one of us could jump down in the hole, grab him real quick before he sprays, and then throw him out. I'll yell real loud so he won't notice when you jump in and grab him. I don't like that idea. Think of something else. I got it. We'll go up to my dad's shop and build a ladder. A skunk should be able to figure out how to climb a ladder. We were in the shop working on the ladder when Mr. Muldoon walked in. I thought I told you not to build anything. What's that? Just a skunk ladder. Oh, well. Tell me if you decide to make anything else. We went back out to the hole and stuck the ladder in it. The skunk showed no inclination to climb it, choosing instead to hide in the cavern it had hollowed out. Just then, we heard Eddie's father yelling at us. What do you mean, skunk ladder? Quick, help me put the door back over the hole. Before we could think of an explanation for a big pile of dirt out in the corner of the pasture, Mr. Muldoon charged up. Now what? What's my door doing out here? What's this big pile of dirt? From this point on, the actions of the parties involved all blurred together. It is difficult to recall the exact sequence of events, but I will try. Mr. Muldoon reached down and grabbed the edge of the door and flipped it off the hole. Smells like a skunk. At which time he shot out of sight, leaving his straw hat suspended in the air. Later, I deduced Mr. Muldoon had been standing on top of the part of the hole where the skunk had hollowed out its cavern. A cloud of dust puffed out of the hole when Mr. Muldoon hit the bottom. Next, he yelled several serious words with the word skunk mixed in. Next, there were lots of earthly scrabbling sounds, and Mr. Muldoon came clawing his way up the side of the hole, but the dirt gave way, and he fell back in, saying something like, "Ooh!" It is important, perhaps, to realize that all the activity so far had taken place in a time span of no more than 4 seconds. Meanwhile, Eddie had run forward, yelling, "Papa, don't hurt him!" and was standing at the top of the ladder when the skunk rushed up that contrivance. Startled and not wanting the skunk to reverse ends and spray him, Eddie reached down and grabbed the little animal by the head, and then threw it back down in the hole. Her arrival was followed by a savage bellow from Mr. Muldoon, who, to our surprise, then came racing up the skunk ladder himself. This was a signal for Eddie and me to start running, which we did, and continued running until the thunderous sounds of Mr. Muldoon's clodhopper boots faded behind us. Still, we ran on, finally outdistancing even the nostril-searing smell of Eddie's father. Eventually, Eddie made his way home and placed himself under the protective custody of his mother until Mr. Muldoon's rage subsided into the odd little facial tic that was to remain with him for several months. In the ruckus at the skunk ladder, Eddie had been hit in the face with a slight charge of skunk spray. Worried at first that the spray might have gone to his head, Mr. and Mrs. Muldoon finally assumed there would be no lasting ill effects. 20 years later, however, Crazy Eddie Muldoon became a PhD in chemistry.